I'm a little anxious about Georgia, to be honest with you. The stakes obviously are huge. We have exceptionally high turnout at this point. My understanding is turnout is 23% lower than it was in the November election, relatively speaking. But this is a special election, and that's still pretty amazing. And the November election was had an enormous turnout. So there's a lot of enthusiasm there. There's also about over 100,000 people now, 112,000 voters who did not vote in the 2020 general election, who are voting, who have voted in this election so far.
Yeah. So it's around 3 million early votes cast, and that's 40% of registered voters in Georgia already.
And that's, I mean, you know, look, there's indications that there's been increased turnout amongst younger people and amongst African Americans. Very hard to read these tea leaves.
I know. I mean, these all sound like positive signs, but once again, we've been here before where we're talking about these wonderful signs for the Democrats. And what do you know? The Republican Party stronghold stands firm. And now you have Trump going to Georgia, which I know we'll talk about, but Loeffler's promising, I'll contest the election results. Could rile up the base. We'll see. It might be too late, though. Again, we just don't know.
We don't know. But what was very interesting was that Joe Biden was in Georgia last night. And the reporting over the past couple of weeks was that Joe Biden was basically telling Democrats in the House in particular to prior to Donald Trump coming out and saying he wanted $2,000 checks. Joe Biden has basically been saying, sort of back off this a little bit. However, Donald Trump provided an opening. Nancy Pelosi, to her credit, took it. They could have just stopped at attempting unanimous consent, but they pushed it all the way to a vote. They had to suspend the rules because it was a change in regular order. And they passed it. They sent it to the Senate. Mitch McConnell killed it, even though Loeffler and Perdue had come out and said they were now for it because they had been being hammered by John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock in this race. And Joe Biden, yesterday in Georgia, essentially just laid it right on the line. He said that despite the fact that Loeffler and Perdue might want it, you're not going to get it if Mitch McConnell maintains control of the Senate. Here's Joe Biden.
One state can chart the course, not just for the next 4 years, but for the next generation. By electing John and the Reverend, you can make an immediate difference in your own lives, the lives of the people all across this country, because their election will put an end to the block in Washington, that $2,000 stimulus check. That money that will go out the door immediately. Tell people who are in real trouble. Think about what it'll mean to your lives. Putting food on the table, paying rent, paying for your mortgage, paying down the credit card, paying the phone bill, the gas bill, the electric bill. Just look around. Millions of people in this country out of work through no fault of their own. No fault of their own. They're struggling. Many are fearful, and many have given up hope. Look at the lines at food banks. Hours and hours and hours. This is the United States of America, for God's sake. And their food lines, like we've not seen since the Depression. And they're getting longer. Families, children, people have worked their whole lives and never asked for a thing except a fighting chance. Now, they're lining up for food in America. And the debate over $2,000 isn't some abstract debate in Washington. It's about real lives, your lives, the lives of good, hardworking Americans. And if you're like millions of Americans all across this country, you need the money, you need the help, and you need it now. Look, Georgia, there's no one in America with more power to make that happen than you, the citizens of Atlanta, the citizens of Georgia.
I mean, it's. And I have some issues with the rhetoric. We'll take that in a second. But the reality is that I think it's easy to overestimate what can happen if the Democrats take the Senate, because you still have folks like Joe Manchin and would-be Joe Manchins who are going to place themselves right in the middle of these two parties and make sure that everything has to go through them, and they'll be a little bit skimpy about stuff. That's the way they get attention. But the fact is that Joe Biden laid it out there with the $2,000. Obviously, there's going to be a lot more that comes with allowing for a Democratic Senate, but that makes it very, very simple. And that's pretty compelling. Now, with that said, I don't necessarily appreciate the idea that, no fault of their own, because it sets up a dynamic that very often, or maybe, sometimes, or in normal times, if people lose their jobs, it's a fault of their own. Or if they're living in poverty, it's a fault of their own, as opposed to structural things. In fact, our guest is going to talk about that, I suspect, today, that lead to that. But as a campaign pitch, as a last day, as a closing argument, that's pretty strong stuff.
Yeah, and I actually think it's fairly well suited for Georgia there. I mean, he's an old school kind of Democrat, and typically southern states like that have churned out Democrats who espouse similar rhetoric here. I mean, Ossoff, for example, he's not Bernie Sanders. So I was pleasantly surprised by this. I hope he did talk to Joe Manchin and the other centrist Democrats who are going to try to be kingmakers in this instance. But it's not just the right strategy, or it's not just the right policy, because it's simple and it gets relief to people quickly and easily. But it's also the right move strategically. And I think this goes against a lot of Biden's inclinations to be more centrist, means testy. But this policy has shown, and stimulus checks have shown to be so popular. They gave Trump a boon in a way that I think Democrats underestimated going into the November election. And larger checks would help Democrats long term. So even if they're just thinking in a self-interested manner, it's the right thing to do. And Biden should be pushing for this. We'll see what happens if both Democrats win and both those seats turn blue. This could not happen, and then they face a whole different set of problems.
I'm not convinced it's not consistent with Biden, because I don't think that Biden has that strong of an ideological perspective. I think he saw the House vote overwhelmingly for this, and he likes to put himself right in the middle, regardless of where that is. And so the point that I think it shows us on some level is that if there is an ability to push our politics to the left, he is not going to swim against that tide. He is going to land right in the middle of wherever the argument is. And if you have overwhelming support from a Democratic House on an issue, he will move to place himself a certain distance, relative. He's always going to keep himself.
I think there's a caveat if that movement helps Democrats, the Democratic Party as a whole electorally. I think that's key to his shift on this issue, because they are convinced that the Senate runoffs.
I think that's true too.